This is not a drill. This is a public health emergency. It is a matter of life and death. Not only do we live in a country that does not have universal child care or paid leave, not only are we on the heels of a baby formula shortage, but there is a Black maternal morbidity crisis in this country.
Hey, Griot fam, I'm Jaron Keith Gaynor, managing editor of politics and Washington correspondent at The Griot, and I am here with U.S. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley from the great state of Massachusetts. Congresswoman Pressley, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Good to be with you.
What would or should this public health emergency look like? And given your expertise in reproductive and maternal health, what are some of the glaring disparities that will likely be exacerbated by this ruling that data shows is not a hyperbole?
Yes, this is not a drill. And sadly, it's a day that many reproductive justice advocates on the front lines, in particular Black and brown women, saw coming. So this is not a drill. This is a public health emergency. It is a matter of life and death. Not only do we live in a country that does not have universal child care or paid leave, not only are we on the heels of a baby formula shortage, but there is a Black maternal morbidity crisis in this country. Black women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. And there are some damning projections that we could see a 33% increase in the Black maternal morbidity rates in this country. More Black women dying, to state it plainly. And overall, an increase in the maternal mortality crisis of 21%. So like all things, this is a crisis that will, the burden of it will be disproportionately borne by our most marginalized communities, including and especially Black women, which is why we need a whole of government approach, which is why we need to exhaust every tool available to us. And ostensibly, President Biden declaring a public health emergency will allow the administration greater flexibility and resources to address this for what it is, to confront it for what it is, a public health crisis, preserving and expanding access to medication abortion, over-the-counter contraception, ensuring that providers and patients are not criminalized, and being able to have those resources that could support those in need.
But are you satisfied with what you've heard so far from the administration? What would you like to see more of?
Well, again, this is a matter of life and death, so I won't be satisfied until something that for 50 years has been a constitutional right. Abortion care is healthcare. Healthcare is a fundamental human right. And so until we codify that and affirm that, I will not be satisfied, and I'll continue to move with urgency and to engage every level of government. We need to continue to support these grassroots abortion funds so that those that are in need of abortion care are able to access the resources necessary to travel. And I think it's important to note that not only is this about bodily autonomy and freedom, which on the heels of Juneteenth, where we were just celebrating emancipation and freedom, to see this Supreme Court, which has repeatedly obstructed the will of the people, roll back the hands of time and roll over our bodies and our bodily autonomy and our freedom. We deserve to decide for ourselves when or if to start a family. But this is also about those who may experience an ectopic pregnancy and need an abortion, or a miscarriage and need an abortion, or for those who've been diagnosed with cancer and cannot pursue treatment until they've had an abortion. The point is, 1 in 4 women have had an abortion in this country. These are our family members, these are our coworkers, our neighbors, people we live, work, and worship with. And so I won't stop fighting until we have engaged every level of government and been exhaustive in a whole of government approach.
Something that stuck out to me in the letter that you and your colleagues sent to President Biden was the mental health component of this conversation around health, that what women and pregnant people will experience, whether they choose to have an abortion or not. There's even postpartum issues around mental health. Could you speak more to the issue of mental health and why that is so important?
Given the threat that Black women and birthing people experience already after a history of medical apartheid, where our bodies have been experimented on, where we've experienced forced sterilization, to now consider a reality of forced birth is devastating. There is a sense of betrayal, a sense of helplessness, real fear. So, and there are layered crises that we're managing as a country. And again, the burden of those crises have all fallen disproportionately on the most marginalized, including and especially Black folk and Black women. And so cumulatively, there's been a sense of collective loss and grief and fear and trauma. And prior to this ruling becoming permanent, already it was my fear that the second pandemic from this global pandemic would be trauma. And so this only exacerbates that psychological and mental toll.
You are a stepmother to a young daughter. How are you feeling in this moment as a mother figure? And what comes up for you when you think about the implications of this ruling for younger generations?
It's hard for me to maintain my composure on that one. The moment that the draft ruling, leaked draft ruling became a new reality in the Supreme Court overturned Roe, I was actually at my daughter's 8th grade graduation. And so I woke up that morning, in spite of the many crises and unprecedented challenges we're facing as a nation, of feeling hopeful and a sense of promise for our country and for our daughter. And by midday, I just felt burdened by, again, betrayal and fear and all the stages of grief. I think just a tremendous sense of loss that we woke up in the morning with more rights than we went to bed with, that my daughter could be navigating a world where she would have fewer rights than I have had, when I was her age and growing up. But, it also resolved me and emboldened me in this fight to be exhaustive, to be vigilant, to be demanding, because I've told her so many times when she's been with me in organizing spaces, and she's wondering why we march, why we protest, why we lobby, why we advocate, because she makes sacrifices right along with me in order for me to do those things. She's heard us say, when we fight, we win. And so I don't want to be a liar to my child, and I have to keep fighting until we win.
Your Republican colleague, Representative Mary Miller, made headlines recently. She thanked Trump at a rally for protecting white life. And while her office said that she misread the text of her speech, it did reignite this conversation about those who feel that the anti-abortion movement is rooted in white Christian culture. You have some, like the scholar Jane Elliott, who say that it is deeply rooted in white supremacy. What's your take?
Well, it absolutely is. And as for her comments, we find ourselves at a moment where they are saying the quiet part out loud. And again, like the roots of the anti-abortion movement, abortion bans are rooted in white supremacy, perpetuate cycles of poverty and economic inequality, and exacerbate many of our starkest health disparities. And as I said, after we've already endured a history of medical apartheid, of experimentation without our consent, of sterilization, and find ourselves in a Black maternal morbidity crisis. Black women are dying 3 times the rate higher that of our white peers, Black women and birthing people. So, again, that history of medical apartheid against Black and brown, immigrant, indigenous, and disabled folks is real. It's a traumatic history.
You mentioned the sacrifice that so many Black women in particular have made on the front lines, and so many movements and fights for democracy, there is frustration being expressed that this could have been prevented by codifying abortion rights, that Democrats had power of the White House and Congress, and yet nothing was done. What is your message to voters who may feel that frustration as we head into, we're in the midst of primaries and heading into a general election in November?
Well, we find ourselves in uncharted territory, which is exactly why I'm saying that it's critical that we exhaust every tool and every avenue to codify and affirm abortion care as a fundamental human right, because it is health care, and that is a fundamental human right. I understand the sense of betrayal and anger. I feel it similarly. And it's why I'm working so hard, because I feel a great responsibility to restore people's faith in government and in our institutions and in those elected to represent and to serve you. So, certainly isn't, we want people to be engaged, and we want their voices to be heard, at the ballot box. But, that is not, uh, that is not what I'm pushing in this moment, because there's more that we must do as leaders to meet the moment before we start asking more of those who are so exhausted and who have been so demoralized by having to fight so hard. And so we should abolish the filibuster and pass the Women's Health Protection Act.